Next up, we have Magnis Energy Technologies, ASX code MNS. We've been looking forward to having them on for some time. The company is a vertically integrated lithium-ion battery player. We have with us Frank Poullas as the executive chairman. Company has a market cap around 320 million and a 57% share price rise over the last 12 months. Frank, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks for the opportunity to be able to present here today as well. So with Magnis Energy Technologies, as we'll see in the upcoming slides, if I could get you to move down to our vision. Yeah, thanks. We are a key global player in the lithium-ion battery supply chain, production and so on. It's something that's really unique, especially in the local marketplace. We're not producing a raw material or some technology that goes towards the lithium-ion battery. We're actually doing we are that integrated battery play where we're talking from raw materials to the technology to actually manufacturing the cells that would go into, whether it's an EV or an energy stationary storage type product. We're there from end to end. And it's something that I think is not only unique in the local marketplace, but actually unique globally when we start talking about lithium-ion batteries and cells. And, on the topic of today's conference, a hidden gem, I believe in the battery space, Magnis is a hidden gem, and it's probably one of those stories that isn't as well known in the marketplace, but we have been working at this for a long time in the background. So when you see some of these plants and the technology and our mine as well, and at the stage it's at, do realize that from where the mine is today or from where these battery plants are, we're talking about minimum 5 years to 8 years, and the battery tech's more than 10 years as well. So while the story might seem new, it's not so new, and there's been a lot of work that's gone in the background to get us to where we are today. We talk about our global opportunities and a rundown of the company on the next slide. So there's the New York battery plant, which we'll go into more detail quite soon. Our natural graphite project, and I mentioned previously about the mine, and then there's also an Australian project in Townsville. There's just the corporate overview, numbers around share price, market cap, cash, which is a consolidated cash position between our Magnis position and the New York entity, with the New York entity roughly being 60% owned by Magnis. We've got to consolidate those numbers. And we go into greater detail of that corporate structure in the next slide, which shows Magnis Technologies and the various ownership levels that we have in our different entities that we're involved in. So firstly, on the cell manufacturing, there's roughly 60% owned of IM3 New York. There's the Townsville project, which I mentioned, at 33%. There's C4V, which is a battery technology company, of which we own just under 10%. And then the mine in Tanzania, which is 100% owned by Magnis. The next slide talks about the board of management team. And I think for a company of our size, we've got some really unique individuals, and hence why we're highlighting it in, our quick presentation here today. But, and headed and first and foremost by Professor Stanley Whittingham. So for those who are unfamiliar, and I'm sure most of you who know the lithium-ion battery space will probably be familiar with Professor Whittingham, but Professor Whittingham was awarded with the Nobel Prize in chemistry in 2019, and he's actually the original inventor of the lithium-ion battery. So, talking about, the battery manufacturing and being involved in this industry. And if you want to talk about, who do you guys have that will allow you to compete with, some of the majors out there, or to be a major player in this space, well, you've got the inventor of the lithium-ion battery. That speaks volumes. And Professor Whittingham's still active in this space and still works to this day full time. So to have him on board is obviously a huge privilege, but also shows that we've got people like Professor Whittingham who believe in what we're doing. We've got Dr. Richard Petty has been on the B20 task forces for finance and infrastructure in the past. Mona Dejani, who in the renewable energy space is a key contributor and has worked on many government projects for the current US administration and previous administrations in the past. And Zarmeen, who is an ESG expert, Peter, who looks after everything on the Tanzanian side of things around the mine, and Mugunthan, who is quite well known in the funds management industry. So what I believe is a really impressive board for a company of our size. And I think that goes down to what we're doing and having people that actually believe in Magnis and the potential that exists out there as well. We'll talk about the New York battery plant next, and that's probably, I would say, the project that we're really focused on in the short term. And for those who follow the company, we're providing updates every few weeks, and we will continue to do so. There is a lot of work that's taking place over in Endicott in New York at the moment, of which, as mentioned, 60% of it is owned by Magnis. We are fully funded to 1.8 gigawatt hours worth of annual capacity or production. What does that mean? Well, as of today, it would be one of the top 3 plants in the US. There are a number of plants that are coming online in the near term that will be sort of larger, but then we're scaling up as well. As you can see, one of the points here is by 2030, we plan to be at 32 gigawatt hours, and internal targets are even more bullish from that point of view as well. It is really important to also talk about the batteries we plan to produce. This has been independently verified. It was a report that was funded and commissioned by NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. They used a group called ABT Associates, which is a well-known consulting group, to look at the life cycle analysis of the production of our lithium-ion batteries and versus other majors in the lithium-ion battery space. And their report said that we would be producing some of the greenest batteries in the world, and comparing it to some of the other producers in the marketplace right now, we're talking about in some aspects over 80% less toxicity levels than our production. So we're talking about US production with a non-China supply chain with some of the greenest batteries in the world, for the US market, but also for other markets as well. But mainly for the US. So as you can see, it's a really exciting project here. And that entity has the exclusive rights for all manufacturing, cell manufacturing patents from C4V. So, and C4V's got some great technology. C4V has been mentored by Professor Whittingham sort of since inception. So we're really excited about what we will be able to produce. And as the slide brings out, 4.4 million cells annually at that 1.8 gigawatt hour production rate, which, as we mentioned, we plan to increase as we go forward. The next slide talks about the current plan update. So as of the end of August, 29% complete. We will have an update in the near future that will give that number at the end of September. There is some great progress being made, especially since that air permit was officially granted by New York State. and that has allowed us now to start construction of the dry room. So what you have is you construct the dry room and then the equipment goes in there, and so that permit was imperative for us going forward. And for those following the company or who will start following the company, you will start seeing that the completion and that percentage really increasing now in a big way. We talk about Townsville in the next slide. Townsville had a feasibility study that was completed last year. We are looking at ways of fast-tracking production, whether it's cells that are coming from the US plant to potentially be having a battery assembly plant locally. We are looking at all options. So, the aim is to grow as quick as we can, exponentially as quick as possible. We are doing that in New York, and we're also looking at options locally as well. And you just have to pick up a newspaper any point in time, and you'll see it's all about sort of renewable energy and sort of green energy going forward. And we want to play a role locally as well. We'll briefly talk about our battery technology in the next slide. So that was one of the aspects, and we will be producing our BMLMP technology. With some out there, you will probably be familiar with NCA and NMC. NCA is traditionally what's being used in a Tesla car battery. They are using now LFP as well for their Tesla Model 3s. And as you can see, if you look at the comparison between the technologies, you can see things around, speed of charging, but main safety, energy density, cost. We sort of tick a lot of those boxes there, but sort of some of those key ones are safety. Our batteries are extremely safe, and that's been independently verified as well, versus the sort of traditional technologies. And then cost and lifespan, these are long-lasting batteries and traditionally at a cheaper cost purely because of the raw materials that are going into it. The next slide goes a bit more into that technology, the fact that it's a non-China supply chain. We don't have any cobalt or nickel in our batteries, and you could see the cell energy, the capacity, and the voltage comparisons between the technologies that are traditionally used in the lithium-ion battery space right now, and we compare very well. Especially, we have got a low. Our batteries are at low cost versus some of our peers in the marketplace. Like, as in by peers, I mean the technologies being NCA or NMC, and we're at the cost of sort of around that LFP price. But as you can see, from voltage, capacity, and cell energy, we're in a different league. And as I mentioned, the Tesla Model 3 is using that LFP technology. So it all bodes well for our tech going forward. We touch on the anode materials from our natural graphite project on the next slide. We are able to produce a battery-grade anode material without the use of any chemical or thermal purification. We are working towards off-takes in the lithium-ion with groups that are providing into anode materials into the lithium-ion battery market. We believe that we're working towards getting an offtake in the near future, and we've got it in our timeline for this quarter for our graphite, which is the next key step towards getting funding for our project. So we need to get those offtakes and those customers in first prior to getting that funding, and we have been making some great progress. And for those who follow our announcements, we recently had a site visit from a North American group who's looking at signing offtake with us. On the next slide, we start talking about our next key milestones. We've commissioned sort of first production, which was our manual production. Semi-automated will begin this quarter, which is quite exciting for us, and that will start producing thousands of cells, and mainly will be used for marketing purposes and testing purposes. We then are looking at next quarter talking about a listing in the US. We've recently brought in a person full-time for IM3 to look at that, and he's making some great progress there. And we're sort of, looking at potentially a SPAC listing, and in the form of the listing for that entity in IM3 New York. And we are talking about some government funding. For those that are familiar with President Biden's infrastructure plan that was passed through recently, there's roughly 17 billion US towards helping cell manufacturers grow exponentially. And it was for those who are either in production or about to be in production. So we're all over that. And we have had a number of meetings with the DOE regarding that program. On the battery tech side, we've been announcing our extra fast charging results and our fast charging results. We mentioned in the past the New York extra fast charging bus program. We will have some details about that this quarter. On the Anode Materials, as I mentioned, or our mine offtakes for our graphite, and finalizing our funding for Natu next quarter. So you can see some really key milestones that we're sort of right in the midst right now, or some, literally a quarter away. So it's a really exciting time for the company. And then talking about the sort of investment rationale in the next slide, we've got sort of, we believe the project and the company ticks the boxes from, the green aspects to being sort of a near-term revenue play as well, and all those ESG sort of aspects that people are looking at in these days. So thank you so much for your time and for hearing the presentation, and thanks, Tim, for the opportunity.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate that there is. Oh, I've just lost my light. Appreciate that there's a lot to get through in that 10 minutes. Now, there's lots of questions here about your listing, and just for clarity, it's IM through New York that would list offshore in the States, but not Magnis per se.
That's correct. There's sort of two different aspects, Tim. We've spoken recently about we're upgrading the listing in Magnis from the pink sheets to the OTC market, which gives people greater access to be able to trade Magnis shares from the US. But when we're talking about the listing and a SPAC or whatever it may be that assists us in getting this listing over the line in the US, it's for IM3 New York.
And we know that you're kind of end to end in terms of owning a graphite mine and taking it all the way through to cell manufacturing. Believe it or not, there's some questions here about recycling. Could that be part of the equation in terms of what you would look at?
So with all our projects, and especially the one in the US, there is recycling there as well. So it's one of those key aspects that's part of any projects that we look at. From a Magnis point of view, though, I don't think that we would be getting involved from that aspect, but our projects will have recycling technologies involved with it. There's a number of groups our guys in the US are working with right now, and on the recycling side as well, and various technologies in that aspect.
And we understand you have kind of confidential contracts in place, but there's questions in here as in, who are your battery customers, and what do they look like, I suppose? Who could potentially use this product, and what would that look like?
Look, one example, one that we've announced in the past, is a group called Martech. So Martech produces unmanned boats and automobiles, mainly for government purposes. And our battery packs are in their products right now. So they will produce from our sort of pilot plant, which is out of a university close to where our battery plant will be based out of, but using our technology. So that's one sort of customer, so government supplier that supplies these unmanned boats and vehicles for mainly to the US and British governments.
And funding obviously becomes critical, and governments and government funding is obviously opening up in this space. You've got a well-credentialed board. How much do they help you in regards to those conversations?
Yeah, look, they're huge in that. And especially when we're talking about funding, especially around our project in the US to help us get to double-digit gigawatt hour capacity, having Professor Whittingham and especially also Mona on the board is imperative. And as I mentioned before, Mona's worked with a lot of on a lot of projects with the US government, especially around the Department of Transport and the DOE, and Professor Whittingham as well on with DOE projects as well. So, I think the project sort of speaks for itself. It's, a non-China supply chain in the US. It's growing. It's got this whole sort of made in the USA for the USA type, banner and focus on the project. But yeah, like we are very confident with sort of the guidelines around that funding that is available out there. We believe we'll be able to tap into that, and we have, in previously announced funding from New York State government as well towards the project.
And Townsville, the Townsville facility is part of, have you spoken to state government there in regards to funding as well?
So the state government, the Queensland state government provided us the funding for the feasibility study. There's discussions with all forms of government at the moment, but what has sort of been, from my aspect, really encouraging is a lot of the groups who you read about in the papers daily, who are providing batteries locally for our local market, have all been reaching out to us because currently they're buying cells, whether it's from the Chinese and mainly from the Chinese, have reached out saying, look, we would love to support, an Australian company and an Australian manufacturing plant as well. So that's been highly encouraging, where I believe that some of these groups will be off takers of us, not only from New York initially, but form the basis for our manufacturing plant in Townsville as well.
And you've got around $1 billion worth of kind of contractual commitments. How active is this space now? I mean, you've been in this industry for a while now. Do you have a lot of potential customers coming to you?
Yeah, so right now there's roughly about 30 customers that are going through like a qualification stage with us. And it's one thing it's a great question, and one point that I think I've got to sort of highlight. In order to get these types of agreements and these contracts and contracts that we've announced, groups go through a qualification process, and usually it's sort of like a minimum sort of like a 2-year process. And these days groups are trying to fast track that. So it's important to know, and this goes for groups like who might be locally listed companies here or overseas who are looking at producing anode materials or cathode materials, to then get cell manufacturers to actually buy their materials. They've got to go through a qualification process, as we have done with our cathode or our anode supplies and so on over the years. So we have got an active list. We always get the question whether there's, any EV players, out of the US or Europe. Yes, there are. But in saying that, the disclaimer there is we need to be up and running with production in the first instance before you get contracts signed with the bigger players. And Herbert Diess, the CEO of Volkswagen, has made that clear in the past. He sort of put out a call saying, if anyone's producing at gigawatt hour scale and isn't talking to us, reach out to us. And that's the key. You've got to be in production, one, to also meet the amount of cells that they're after, but also they want to make sure that you're up and running. We're talking about our fully automated production being roughly 6 months away, so it's we're very close to that period, but we are in qualification programs with EV players as we speak right now.
And obviously there's been some press around your contracts and who they are. And I suppose what investors don't understand is kind of the process in the background. I mean, a lot of these are confidential. There's NDAs signed. Can you talk about who qualifies those contracts in the background?
So thanks for bringing that up, Tim. So when it comes to our contracts as well, as I mentioned, the end users go through a qualification process. So it's not like someone comes to you tomorrow and says, look, we want to buy some batteries. We like the fact that, it's a non-China supply chain, and we'd just like to buy your batteries, and here we'll just sign an agreement. One that's been sort of publicized recently is a group called Sook Energy. That's sort of their name came out in the media. We've gone through literally 4 years of qualification with this group to get to a point that, they were ready to sign a contract with us. And that is something that is, common across the board. From our side as well, you've got to remember you've got a sector that is, when you start talking about the supply of cells, it is very tight currently. And as an example, we're looking at a project overseas in Asia where they were looking at putting one of our containers with a bunch of cells at the back of stabilizing the grid. And because of the volumes of cells, we would potentially look at going out there and sourcing those cells from one of the current majors. The shortest lead time we could get was 5 months. So that's how tight the market is. So when you're an end customer and you're currently buying cells off some of these groups, the last thing you also want to do is go out there and say, going forward, we will be buying cells from IM3 New York, when those customers have got, people knocking on their door right now saying, look, we want to buy cells. And they're telling them, look, there's a 5-month lag. Now, we're not saying that those customers will only buy off us. We will be one of their suppliers, but it's so tight at the moment. And it's also, as you mentioned, it's not a sector where people, name names and quantities and prices that they're buying cells and so on. There's very limited data on those things. So it's, just to give, the audience, a bit of an understanding, you don't traditionally announce volumes from gigawatt hours or megawatt hours, and the price that you're selling to each customer at, because every customer's buying at different prices depending on volumes they're purchasing and what has been negotiated with them. So it's a bit of a complex market when it comes to that. But seeing that we're near-term production and near-term revenues, people will be able to start seeing, revenue numbers around the New York entity and profits that it'll be generating and so on, seeing that we're so close from production.
And just finally, there's questions still around the kind of New York listing of your battery factory, IM3. The reality is, are you doing that because it gives you access to capital and also has the potential to realise value for Magnis shareholders in terms of your 60% stake in that business?
So firstly and mainly, it's, to access capital, to be, brutally honest. In saying that, I think there could be a huge re-rating in Magnis's share price as well. When you look at cell manufacturers in the marketplace and the valuation that is put on them per gigawatt hour, and for those out there, have a look at CATL in China. They're a pure cell manufacturer. Look at their market capitalization and look at their production in the last sort of 12 months. And derive the valuation per gigawatt hour. And literally, if, the most recent numbers I looked at, which was probably about 4 weeks ago, and I'm not sure as to where they are today, there was roughly a valuation per gigawatt hour somewhere around that $4 to $5 billion US mark. New York has capacity of 1.8 gigawatt hours with no shortage of customers. Owning 60% of it, there could be a potential for huge upside there for Magnis. But answering the question, getting access to capital first and foremost, but I think there'll be knock-on effects for Magnis shareholders and for Magnis itself as well.
Thanks, Frank. That's all we have time for. It's certainly a theme and a topic that is prominent in the press that we see all the time. Good luck out there and have a good weekend.